Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of OmniAthlete. You believe that you can be more, and so do we. We created this show and company to do it with you by empowering your performance with the wisdom and techniques of the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors. Okay, so today's guest is a board certified psychiatrist who holds an appointment with the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and is a co founder of the Sports Energy and Consciousness Group. He's the director of the Integrative Medicine Project and a consultant psychiatrist to the Pain Management Program at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital in Boston. He has studied energy healing, meditation, and hypnosis for over 30 years, presenting at workshops nationally and internationally on the integration of subtle energy techniques and theories with the allopathic medical model. He serves on the advisory boards of 3 journals, has written widely for medical and lay journals, and his documentary film about group energies in baseball, The Joy of Sox, Weird Science and the Power of Intention, was an official selection at the 2013 Boston International Film Festival, received national recognition, and was broadcasted on PBS. It's my pleasure to introduce to OmniAthlete, Dr. Rick Leskowitz. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Thanks, Josh. Nice to be here.
So, the backdrop and context of this conversation is team energy and chemistry and the fan engagement and interaction. But where I'd love to start is, what was your journey like coming to the power of subtle energy? Where did that start for you, and how did it really pull you to it?
Well, like most journey stories, it's hard to say where it actually began specifically. I've always been interested in sort of the unusual or the offbeat. I took some time off before going to medical school, between college and medical school, and that was really important. I did some traveling to other countries and other cultures, but it also got me off the treadmill because, to be honest, medical training is a form of brainwashing. And by stepping away for a couple of years, I could sense that there's a bigger picture going on. So when I went back to medical school, I wasn't quite so susceptible, if you want to put it like that. I got interested in meditation at that point, more for stress management than for, opening up to broad vistas. And I decided that psychiatry was the way to go because I was always fascinated with how the mind works and what the connection is between the mind and body. But back then, psychiatry was more about talking to people. It wasn't prescribing medications. It wasn't quite the emphasis that it is nowadays. So after my training, I began to work in the VA with veterans who were traumatized, and we really didn't have much luck with them, to be honest. And then a friend of mine said, "Would you like to come to a lecture given by an energy healer?" And I didn't know what that was. And in my mind, healing was, I think actually from my background, it was more a Christian sort of thing. And being from a Jewish tradition, it was sort of off limits. But I trusted my friend's judgment, so I went along and joined him. And it was really an important event in my evolution because this was a woman based in Los Angeles who actually worked with physicians to share her insights because she was so sensitive to energies that, everybody's had the experience. You walk into a room and you can tell people are angry or happy or something like that. But she had it so focused that she could tell, your thyroid gland is inflamed or something that to my logical mind, it sounded ridiculous, but seeing her work with people, I was basically hooked. So I studied with her, so Reverend Rosalind Briere. I studied with her for 7 or 8 years when she would come to Massachusetts and do intensives. And we learned how to use our hands to channel energy and balance and manipulate energies. And I was the dumbest kid in the class. I was still too much up here to really get into my body to develop the sensitivities that my colleagues were manifesting. But it did key me into the truth, the essence that energy is real, and what happens at the energy level comes first, and what happens at the physical level is an outgrowth of the invisible stuff. So that was kind of my background. I ended up going from the VA to a pain management program at a rehab hospital, and the good thing there is that people in chronic pain are willing to try anything. Nothing else has worked, the medicines, the injections. So our clinic introduced a lot of these energy-based techniques, even though it was in a mainstream hospital. So we were starting to see things happen that were really exciting. But I didn't have a particular way to go forward with it. What happened was I'm also a sports fan. And actually in Boston, you pretty much have to be, or you won't have anybody to talk to. But excuse me. So in 2004, for viewers who were not baseball fans, the Boston Red Sox won the World Series for the first time in 86 years. And it was a really big event. And there was an energy, kind of a regional energy, that just swept everybody along. You know, the World Series takes, and the playoffs takes a few weeks. So it had a chance to build and build. And I literally noticed that my patients were not as depressed as usual. There was something about this group energy that was an antidepressant. So it was fun, and it was a great ride. And then they won the World Series and had the parade. It was a hoot. But kind of that was it. Until, actually thinking the timing, it was the next year they were having a lot of trouble. They weren't able to recreate their success. So I put together some ideas about how energy relates to the Red Sox, and put it together as an op-ed for the local newspaper, for the Boston Globe. And it was, the title was, Can Weird Science Save the Sox? With the idea being that if the Red Sox use some of these techniques related to individual and group energy, maybe they could turn their season around. They didn't turn their season around, but the publication of the op-ed led to some interesting events. The main one was I got a call the next day after it appeared in the paper from my cousin, who's a film producer. And he said to me, he asked me, what are you doing on Saturday? And I said, I don't know. And he said, we're going to Fenway Park to start filming our documentary. He says, what documentary? It turns out he had cold called the Red Sox and said, did you see that op-ed in the Globe? We'd like to film it. You make a film about it. And they, said, sure, come by. You can interview fans, you can interview players. So we started that, and that began the journey of applying these concepts of sort of subtle energy, being in the zone, alignment to sports and the Red Sox in particular. And we had a blast making the film because we had access to players, to fans, all of whom experienced this kind of group energy phenomenon, and also to scientists, because there's a surprising amount of research that validates this stuff. We did a couple of tests, demos to measure what happens in group settings. And, the upshot is that we demonstrated something that everybody already knows. Everybody has had experiences of being in a large group, whether it's a concert or a political rally or what have you, where you can just feel there's something bigger going on. And if it's the right vibe, it's really fun. So that became the film that you mentioned, The Joy of Sox, Weird Power and the Science of Intention. And it was, it didn't win any Academy Awards, even though I thought it should have. But it led to, I did presentations at different professional meetings around this topic. And I gradually began to attract in different sports psychologists, athletes, trainers who had this similar experience. And one thing led to another. I'm part of a professional organization that uses a technique of acupressure to do emotional healing. And I met Greg Warburton, one of the key people in our group there. I met Barry Robbins, another one of our co-founders, at a screening of the film at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I met another football player who's not prominent with us anymore around these issues, but he introduced us to David Megacy, who turns out to have the biggest Rolodex on the block, and he pulled in a lot of people, and it just became obvious that we had a group here. So we put our heads together. We came out with a book called Sports, Energy, and Consciousness. What's the full title? Awakening Human Potential Through Sport. And that was fun to do, but it didn't have the kind of outreach that we thought it should have. So we put together a few of the conferences at Dominican University in California. And as you came on board, Josh, you really widened our vision to see how to scale it up even larger than any of us had thought. So that's where the whole OmniAthlete piece comes in. But it's really exciting to see that there are principles and techniques that underlie some of these phenomena that everybody experiences, and that they can be learned, they can be taught, and people are really willing and interested to talk about it and to learn it. So that's where kind of where we're at. That's sort of the origin story of OmniAthlete, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one that it's energizing to follow that trail, Rick, because we haven't had a chance yet to share that on a wider level yet. And what's so amazing, you talk about it happens on an energetic level, right, before it happens on a physical level. And I wonder, in your experience, just in life, but really around sport, as fans, we all know that feeling of being in a game where the energy is, whether it's high or low, it's palpable. Yet it seems like for a lot of us as athletes still, or even in the coaching world, there is sometimes this gap between we can feel the energy, but we don't necessarily want to explore what to do with it. What has caused that gap or creates that gap from your experience?
Well, let me start with a disclaimer. I think I'm the only person in our whole organization who's really, at heart, not an athlete. I reached my athletic peak in high school when I played second doubles in the school tennis team. Actually, this does relate to what you're saying. I lettered for 4 years, which sounds really impressive until you hear that the first 2 years I was on the team, we had a perfect record in the sense that we were 0-32. We didn't win a single match for 2 years. Junior year, we won our first match. Senior year, we had a 500 record. And from the year after I graduated onward, we were perennial league champions. Mm. So some very interesting things happened in terms of the mindset and the culture of the players there, that they learned that, actually, this is possible. And if we give it a shot, we can win. In my career, I had one experience with fan energy because at one match, one of the girls from the girls team came and watched us. that was our total audience for 4 years. So I don't have the personal experience as a participant to know how to work with fan energy. But giving talks and lectures, there's fan energy in the audience. If you're not connecting with the audience and they're kind of dozing off, it's really an awkward and awful feeling, actually, that you're totally separated and separate from them. On the other hand, if you're in stride, a lecturer can be in the zone too. It's not just athletes, but if a lecturer is in the zone and really resonating with the audience, it's very enlivening and addicting almost. You hear stories about, especially comedians, I don't know why this is, but especially comedians who become really dependent on the laughter of others. I think part of it is just their self-esteem and self-image, and I don't want to get too psychological there. But there's an energy from an audience that is really powerful. So people have known about it and learned to work with it over the years. And in interviewing the players, one of the questions that struck me was, what about when you're, like, if a Red Sox team is playing in Yankee Stadium where everybody is booing? That's a fan energy, but it's really negative. And I would totally be, overwhelmed and discombobulated by it. But they talked about ways that they would mentally reframe it, use a cognitive reframe, and say that they must be really worried about us to put that much energy into booing. Yeah. And so we could take that energy and make it into a positive. It's really like alchemy. A normal person would think of as a negative energy. They use the mental flip and a positive that enhance their performance. So, that's why they're star athletes and I'm not.
So where is what I think is really interesting, Rick, is that so right there we're talking about there's an energetic frequency that we pick up on, that we are in tune with, and then there's the mental or the cognitive way that we connect to it or that we use it. What is, for the athletes that you had a chance to interview and that you've engaged with, what does that model look like to them in terms of how they go or how they see the energy, the mind, and the body?
Well, different people have different models of it. And I think part of the value of OmniAthlete is hearing the broader picture, because there are, in my view anyway, there are different levels that people, in medical school, people are just bodies. We're just machines, just physical structures. And it was like a big revolution to think that stress and psychology and emotion could affect health. It's obvious if you live in a body that that's true, but it required a big paradigm shift. And I think it's the same with athletes, that so much training is focused on mechanics. Is your grip right, and you're holding the ball right, and what angle is your arm slot, and things like that. And those are important, but it's the tail wagging the dog if you focus at that end. So more and more athletes are realizing that, yes, their emotions affect how they perform. And if they just had an argument with their girlfriend or their wife or something, it's going to have an impact. You can get good at suppressing it, and that's a important skill short term, but eventually it builds up. It takes a toll on the body, and you need to find some techniques to deal with it. So I think athletes more and more are coming to view emotions, let's say coming to view thoughts as an important part of the picture. Emotions is a harder one for them to acknowledge, because there's sort of the whole macho tinge to being an athlete in America, where, I guess the bottom line is big boys don't cry. They don't express some of these emotions of vulnerability. And that's why it's been so important that so many of the speakers that you've interviewed are talking directly about this and how to make it emotional vulnerability and openness a part of performance, because it leads to opening your heart and the use of that love energy or vibration to bring your body and mind into alignment. I think the intermediary or the connecting link is energy. And this is really what I'm going to describe is based on the view from traditional Chinese medicine, from yoga and Ayurveda. Many of the healing traditions around the world have a mystical component to it, where pretty much every tradition but Western medicine believes in invisible healing energies. We're gradually waking up, but that's a big part of it. So they think that the Chinese have a slogan that really captures it. That their word for energy is qi, which is spelled Qi but pronounced chi. And their slogan is, the mind directs the qi, the blood follows the qi. By blood, they mean the physical functioning organs. So the idea is that whatever thoughts, emotions you have, that conditions how your energy flows in your system, and the body follows suit. The body does what the energy body tells it to do. So there's the idea that there's a physical body, an energy body, an emotional body, and a mental body. And then the mystical level is that there's even a consciousness body, or a spirit body, a soul. Every tradition has a different name for it. So I think the ultimate athlete will work at all those levels and will have to be spiritually connected in order to optimize his performance or her performance. So it's a big paradigm shift, as they call it, but it's really happening. And honestly, this most recent phase of OmniAthlete, every week you come up with somebody else who's doing this, and I'm amazed. I thought there were maybe 5 or 6 people who were aligned with these ideas, and it's really impressive to see how many people are resonating to these concepts. So it's exciting to see that evolution as well.
It's this notion of waking up, right? And I think you're pointing to what we're all feeling as a community, which is that more, as soon as we give ourselves permission to say it, we find other people are giving themselves permission to say it, or we're giving other people permission to say it by saying it, right? And there's this spider web that occurs. What's really cool, Rick, is that when I think about fans and how fans interact with athletes, so often I don't know whether it's a study or there's a great book reference, or in a book, there's this reference to PTSD for veterans. And what the author cites as one of the reasons why at times PTSD may be so intense is that there's this separation between the experience that somebody who's in the active military goes through and what the everyday person goes through, right? And they come back and they're integrated into everyday life, and it's there isn't necessarily any way for us to understand it and as an everyday person, a way to connect on that level, not just on a physical level, but on an energetic and emotional level to what they went through. And with athletes, especially at the higher levels of competition, college, professional, Olympic, you experience a similar level of separation energetically. And what I think the work that you did with the film is why it's so powerful is it points to the fact that there are ways for us to connect on that energetic level as fans and actually support, heal, demonstrate that love and empathy and connection to an athlete that doesn't have anything to do with just the physical connection or body.
Yeah, no, those are good examples. I think with combat veterans, they're bound together by a bond that's stronger than anything they experience when they come back to civilian life. And that's part of why it's hard to reintegrate as an individual person. It's part of why veterans groups are so powerful, because then they can feel reconnected and whole again. Similarly with athletes, that the bond, they in the course of a long season, people often say that they spend more time with their teammates than with their family. So there are very powerful energetic bonds within that group. So what's the connection between that group, that circle of performers, let's say, and the fans? And that's what was really interesting in some of the research that we did, is that you're not just sitting up in the stands looking at some people down there doing something. That once you embrace the energy perspective, we're all in this sea of energy together, even if they're 100 feet away, or actually some research is showing that even if you're 100 miles away, that you can be energetically connected. So the fans' energy does impact the players, and it's not just what they hear. Loud cheering, they can hear that and react to it. Particular words that the fans use, they can hear that and decode it and cognitively process it. But there's also the invisible stuff that is part of the interaction. And that was one of the high points of making the film, is that we went out to California, a research group called the Institute of Heart Math. And what they do is I don't remember the date, I think it's at least 30 years they've been doing research on the rhythm of the heart and how different emotions affect the rhythm and how that rhythm can affect your environment. And the basic idea is the heart isn't a metronome that just beats bip, 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 that there's longer and shorter pauses between the beats that depend on your emotional state. And if you're frazzled or anxious or angry, there's not much variation between the beats. But when you're in states of appreciation, that actually is the emotion that is most powerful. You develop this heart rhythm that brings you into alignment with your brain and your heart. And they've done measurements that when people are trained in how to get into this heart rhythm using the emotion of appreciation, their reflexes improve and mind-body coordination improves, and their physical functioning improves. So that's great that an athlete can do it within himself. The kind of exciting and cool thing is that if fans get into that state, it impacts the athletes positively. So we did this test study in the psychophysiology laboratory at HeartMath, where I was actually a guinea pig. I'm just trying to think. Can't really get the picture up there, but so I was blindfolded and had earphones, and so I was in sensory isolation. I was connected up to the machine that measured my heart coherence. That's their term for this rhythmic pattern of heartbeat. And I was told to just get into my state of relaxation. And at some point, which I didn't know because I was blindfolded, 4 HeartMath practitioners came and sat behind me. And on a signal from the research leader, it sounds ridiculous, actually. They just started focusing silently on the heart region of their body, feeling the emotion of appreciation, knowing from their experience that it puts their heart into that rhythm. But the question was, what effect would it have on me, who was sitting a few feet away and not aware of what was happening? And lo and behold, within literally less than 10 seconds of them getting the signal to enter that state, my heart coherence monitor on the computer screen. It started to, let me see, do this the right way. It started to go higher, 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 just like that. All along, before they came in, I was just kind of in what they call an incoherent state. And as soon as they started doing it, I went into that state of mind-body coordination. So what that says is that if the fans could get into that state of appreciation, that would influence the athletes as well. And they would get into that state of coordination, and presumably their functioning, their performance on the field would improve. I came close, but it never quite happened. That before, in the baseball games at Fenway Park, they often have some little ceremony before the game of somebody getting an award or honoring somebody's service. And I had floated the idea of, can I just do a 1 minute kind of guided meditation for everybody in the audience to do this? It didn't quite get to the level of acceptance, but that's the kind of experiment that's theoretically possible. What happens if you get fans in alignment the same way that you can get athletes in alignment? So that's for future generation.
What's so cool, Rick, and what comes to mind for me is so I think about the great home fields right now in professional sports, right? The places where it seems like the energy is accepted in a more natural way, and it doesn't feel like it's taboo. Seattle and the 12th man with their football team, Green Bay Packers, the football team, Fenway Park.
Right.
And what comes to mind for me is these organizations, whether intentional or not, have cultivated that energy, right? They've made it integral to the experience of being part of that community of the team. And as I was preparing for our interview, one of the things that was really interesting to me is in looking at why don't more teams invest in treating the fan as a member of the team, if we just take football as an example, the way the Seahawks do, right? Or the way that it feels like maybe the Green Bay Packers do, because it has outcomes and objective performance impact.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a totally valid point and a good question. And I hope other teams don't cotton onto it, because it's nice that the Boston teams keep their advantage by knowing about the secret. No, you're right. It's I think teams tend to look at fannies in the seat, or whatever the expression is. They want to get the maximum attendance and revenue, knowing that the cheers will be louder, but not seeing how it can help the team perform better. I think that's the piece that is not well understood. Seattle has a unique culture, partly because it's Seattle and that has its own culture as a city, partly because Pete Carroll is very savvy about these kind of things. It's interesting that the Boston area football team has been very, very successful, but their main coach is very mechanically oriented. He doesn't talk about intangibles or love or caring or things like that. It's more about, here are the skills you got to do, and here's the route you got to run, things like that. And yet it works. So there's different approaches that work, but certainly there's fan energy. That would be a really interesting study to measure fan energy at different stadiums, different teams around the world. It's not just the Red Sox. It's not just baseball. It's not just America. You watch some of these World Cup matches, and
sure.
Oh my God, it's really intense. So yeah.
Well, so where does this take you? What I think about with the Patriots, because you're right, Belichick is not somebody who, when you think of a spiritual coach, Bill Belichick is not the first name that's going to come to mind. And yet he is maybe one of the greatest coaches in professional sports history, right? And one of the things that does seem consistent about Belichick that's consistent with Pete Carroll, with Phil Jackson, with John Wooden, with all of the great coaches, is there is a commitment to this level of ritualistic consistency in what they do and the culture that they create, how focused on that consistency they are, and the ritual of being consistent. And what we're learning as we go down this path with athletes is that rituals have the capacity, when looked at that way, to really maybe unlock isn't the right word, but to get that spiritual energy flowing. So it almost seems like with Belichick, with Brady, with what's happening in the Patriots organization, even if it's not intentional, the byproduct of that focus on the consistency and the rituals almost unlocks that energy all the same.
Yeah, I mean, think how much more powerful it would be if it was conscious and intentional.
Right.
Because you're right, ceremony and ritual throughout history has been designed to build energy. Whether it's people in a circle or the stone circle or, pagan rituals or whatever, it's designed to build the energy for whatever purpose, whether it's fertility rites or sports performance. So, I think Belichick is successful because he certainly builds a strong bond with everyone because they're selfless. No one is bigger than the team, and they know that they may have a very small role to play. Like a good example is this year was Rob Gronkowski, our Hall of Fame, eventually will be Hall of Fame tight end, who maybe has lost a step. So he wasn't the go-to receiver that he used to be, but he developed a role as a blocker. And it's not a glamorous role, and it doesn't show up in the statistics. But he knew that if he did that role correctly and successfully, the team would flourish. So he was willing to put his ego aside for the greater good. And that's really what spiritual practice is, putting your ego aside for the greater good. So it's not the language that we usually use to talk about sports, but I think in an I don't know, it's an unintentional way. It's a non-spiritual way. Belichick and coaches like that obtain the same result, that they get a strong sense of cohesion that magnifies the energy. But, it's been a rare team that uses these energy approaches overtly. Over the years, one of the psychologists who worked with us in the earlier years has taught energy flow techniques to several pro teams. And I can't remember now whether we are or are not at liberty to name the teams because, people are, they don't want the secrets out because it's a competitive advantage. But she would have group exercises where people would do certain kinds of energy circulation patterns that would build the cohesion. So it's not just, a rote ritual performance, a mindless ritual performance. It's a conscious and fully intentional ritual performance. And you're right, the more you practice it and repeat it, the greater it builds. And, it's like Malcolm Gladwell's point of, I think it was 10,000 repetitions before you feel like you've mastered something. So it's the same idea that it can become so fully ingrained and embodied that way.
There's such an interesting parallel there that, so often, even now, and it's easy being part of this community, it's so easy to take for granted the language we use, but we know that this is still in such a small percentage of the athletic community, talking about spiritual energy and peak performance as parts of the same whole. And what came to mind for me right there is that there is such a natural parallel between, in a spiritual sense and in spiritual traditions and practices, we are learning to surrender, right? We're learning to allow ourselves to just be fully present and surrender our control over the how, so to speak, and really focusing just on the energy and the outcome that we're holding as this positive intention. And that is the same as saying, hey, my role is going to be whatever the team needs my role to be. Right. And I'm going to step out of this belief that I have to decide and control as an athlete or as a coach how that looks or shows up. Those are the same principles. We just have different words for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly true. And, as we were talking, I'm thinking of the parallel with some of the Eastern traditions, especially in the yoga tradition. There's a guru, a teacher who is, you surrender your ego to the guru with the understanding that he, or it's almost never she, that he will take you to that state of enlightenment. So I don't know if I would necessarily call Bill Belichick a guru, but people do surrender a greater or smaller part of their ego to the greater good. And I think, a lot of athletes, from my understanding, are very deeply religious. And I don't know, again, what goes on behind the scenes, but there could be a mechanism for using that language that they are comfortable with to describe what they're also doing in the locker room and on the playing field. So it's very parallel as an outsider. I think the language isn't quite there yet, but the parallels definitely are.
So one of the most, I think, fascinating elements when we talk about energy is its relationship to pain, especially physiological pain. And for athletes, as we go through life, even if we play unscathed, which as an athlete is almost impossible, right? We will just experience these different moments of injury, these different moments of our body signaling to us on some level that there's something out of whack, and it usually manifests itself as injuries or pain, chronic sometimes. And I'd be really curious to know from your work and from what you've experienced, is there a consistent theme when that chronic pain emerges? Are there consistent, maybe, energetic patterns that somebody can begin to unwind when they're dealing with that kind of chronic pain?
Yeah, great question, Josh. The medical model that treats most pain is that it's caused by some damaged tissue that's sending nerve messages to the brain. And if you block those nerve messages, everything will be fine. So that's why injections and medications are at the forefront. And honestly, that's a big part of why the opioid crisis is happening now, is that people just throw the painkillers at the pain, not remembering that there are natural opioids that we can learn to generate on our own with certain practices. So pain is not just a physical experience. There's an emotional component, no matter how it happened. In my clinic, oftentimes the pain would start from, let's say, an automobile accident or something that's obviously emotionally very traumatic. So it's all well and good to get, range of motion from the physical therapist and the broken bones heal and all. But many of these people will have a residual pain because the emotional component is never addressed. It's the same with athletes too. And the emotions it's nothing mysterious. If you have an automobile accident, you may just have a sense of fear and lack of safety wherever you go that you carry with you. So your body is always in this emergency mode, and that's not healthy. An athlete, the injury, it depends what the injury means to the person, but it could be that they made an error that cost the team the game or the championship, and so that feeling is a reminder that they blew it, and they're sort of punishing themselves, literally punishing themselves with the pain that their body generates. So if you can find ways to access the emotional core and heal it, because emotions can be healed, basically because love is stronger than fear, then you can, the body can heal itself. So some techniques I'm more familiar with than others, and the acupressure technique that Greg Warburton and others use is one that we use a lot in our clinic. And just in a nutshell, for people who are watching this, the idea is that you remember, you reflect on whatever the event was that happened, you identify the emotion, and especially you notice where in your body it is. So you might get butterflies in your stomach whenever you think about that, the tackle that knocked you out or whatever. And you name the emotion, and let's say it's shame that you blew the game or something like that. So you start with a statement of self-acceptance. Even though I'm still upset about that, how I blew the play that cost us the championship, even though I'm still embarrassed and humiliated by it, I accept myself fully and completely. And some kind of, clearing process like that. Interestingly, for many people, that alone helps to resolve the issue. But then for other people, you go through this sequence of tapping on key acupuncture points. The patient does it on themselves while you're making different statements about the emotion. And that helps to balance out so that you can release all these unpleasant emotions. And, the deep breathing helps to release it. So that by the end of the process, you can remember that event without it triggering some kind of fear response or anxiety response. And when you get to that state, your body is able to go through its natural rebalancing and natural healing process. So we use it a lot in the pain clinic. Greg and others are using it with athletes, even if they don't have physical pain. If they have emotional pain, they can't get on the mound and pitch when they're against this one particular team because they feel like they're jinxed. That's it's a mental pain, and if you learn how to dismantle it with this technique or other techniques, then you can go and function at your optimum. So I think it's a really good parallel. There are other techniques too to help the body come into better alignment and release pain. Given the sports focus here, I'll mention another technique it's a hands-on technique where the practitioner puts their hands on the patient, the athlete, and helps the nervous system to unwind. This was developed by osteopaths. The technique is called craniosacral therapy, and very, very gentle pressure. They like to say that it's the same amount of pressure as the weight of a nickel, so it's barely anything, but it's enough to cue in the connective tissue of the body and the protective layer around the nervous system to unwind and release. And one athlete in particular, a former champion football player, Heisman Trophy winning football player named Ricky Williams, took some time off from his NFL career and explored some of this. He went on to become a craniosacral therapist, and it made such a big difference to his, bodily musculoskeletal injuries, but also to his cognitive function, because, he had untold number of concussions or subconcussive hits. But it made such a difference that he said, I got to bring this back to my brethren. So he is now working with the Primary Training Institute for Craniosacral, the Upledger Institute in Florida. And they've run through several cycles of groups of former football players come in, spend a week on site, and get intensive treatments morning and afternoon, and also do a lot of bonding. Mm-hmm. And they measure, things like cognitive function, range of motion before and after, and very dramatic results. The number of participants is still too low to be statistically significant in a way that would get the eye of researchers, but the athletes who've gone through it speak very highly of it. They mention the bond, that reconnecting with others is really healing in and of itself, but also the hands-on manual therapies are really profound, and they release a lot of emotion. That part and parcel of going through these techniques is not just lying quietly on the treatment table, but you're saying, man, every time that piece moves, I remember the time my dad was yelling at me and I felt so humiliated, and then there's an emotion there. And when you can release that emotion, it might be crying, or it might be expressing how pissed off you are at the coach or whatever it is, that those emotions clear from the body, and the physical body can go on and do what it naturally does, which is to heal itself. So pain is a really interesting doorway into these energies. And, a lot of the researchers in post-traumatic stress, treating veterans, for example, tendency now is to not just talk to the veterans. Like when I worked in the VA before I went to Spalding, the way we treated PTSD was to have like a group of vets talk about their experience. And yes, it was cathartic, but it just re-traumatized them because they relived it over and over and over again. They didn't have a way to release it. But now some of the leading researchers in PTSD have recognized that you have to have a bodily component to it. So you'll have like yoga or trauma-informed yoga, for example, to help the body regain a sense of comfort without it being intrusive or forceful. There's several different types of physically oriented treatment, including the tapping that activates the meridians that are used. The title of the sort of a book that one of the greatest researchers has put together summarizing his life work is called "The Body Keeps Score," which is really an elegant kind of metaphor for what happens. That whatever psychological things are happening up here in your mind and your brain, your body is keeping score and registering it in some way or another. So once people start to work with the body, the psychological and emotional healing can happen as well. So athletes are part of that. It's physical injury, emotional injury, all going together hand in hand.
What is really striking in a sense is that we can do so much physical work and yet not be working from the body up to these other energy systems, right? We can go to PT, we can utilize practices and tools that are aimed at our body, but they may not actually be working through to the level of what does this mean to us? What is the emotional and the psychological connection to it? It's so fascinating because it's so easy for us to say we got hurt, I need to go rehab my body. And we just skip over the step of, oh, there are other pieces of the energetic puzzle that are connected to this.
And a key ingredient to all that is mindfulness. That if you're, working on the treadmill or something while you're talking to somebody about the weather or reading a book or something, you're not in your body. Literally, your attention is not in your body. And whereas if you can do your PT and really feel each part moving and bring your attention to every piece, the healing happens much more effectively. So you're not separating yourself from your body. You're not dissociating yourself, as we say in psychiatry, from the body, where you're here and your body is there. You're associating yourself. You're diving in. You're inhabiting your body while you're doing these movements, and it's much more powerful that way. And that's why I think practices like Tai Chi, for example, are so effective and powerful, because it's a mindful, meditative movement sequence. So you're really attending to what's going on in your body, and that makes a lot of difference.
Rick, this has been energizing and just energizing. Wow. Before I ask my final question, where can these guys go if they want to connect with you online?
I guess I haven't checked recently, but I assume my email address is on the website, and people can contact me there. rick.leskowitz@gmail.com. Mm-hmm. A couple of resources. Are we allowed to promote products?
Sure, by all means, yeah.
Well, there's the movie is The Joy of Socks, and it's reversed. How about that? That can be ordered through the OmniAthlete website. The book that I wrote that sort of described the content of the movie in more detail is also, I think you can probably get it from Amazon. Wow, this is weird that it's a reverse image, but it's called The Joy of Socks. I talk in more detail about some of the science behind these different energy aspects of sports. And then the book that we wrote as a group, the Sports Energy and Consciousness Group, is also available through the OmniAthlete website. So those are ways that people can they're more cognitive. I think the practices are really what you guys are starting to roll out now through Greg and other people like that, where it's important to get the cognitive stuff so that your head is aligned with what your practices are. Otherwise, you'll have all these but kind of thoughts that take you off track. So it's important to engage all the levels, body, energy, emotions, mind, and spirit. And that's, it's the prescription for spiritual evolution, and it's the prescription for athletic excellence as well. And, I think you look around, the culture really needs it. Culture is so stuck in fear and oppositional stuff and negative emotions like blaming and attacking and destroying that it really makes a difference to have, even if it's just a few people in every community or every network, a few people who have their own personal alignment. People will sort of look up from the headlines of the newspapers or the latest political speech and say, that guy, he's got it together. She really radiates some feeling, and I would like to ask her, how does she do that? And so, whether athletes or what, I think there's really a hunger for this whole spiritual dimension that's, for whatever reason, is really missing from our cultural discourse, as they say. And I think it's really, the time is ripe. So it's happening in a lot of different forums and fronts. And, there are a lot of these retreat centers where people can go for a weekend or a week to do a training in meditation or yoga or what have you, and then come back into their work environment and bring some of these changes with them. And, what's the matter with you? You seem different somehow. And people can recognize it, can kind of grok it. And I think that's how the change is happening. So it's a really amazing time to be alive, because so much is screwed up, and yet there's so much potential for change that, you can really feel it bubbling up. And it's almost like all this negative stuff has to come to the surface so that we can clear it. But there's huge, huge potential for what lies ahead.
It's not to overuse this, but it's an energizing time to be alive, especially in the world of sport. Wow.
Yeah.
Rick, this show, as you know, is called OmniAthlete because we want to understand what it takes to be the ultimate body, mind, and spirit competitor. So the final question of the show is, what does being an OmniAthlete mean to you?
Well, one of the things that we discovered in doing this work is that the word competition isn't, head to head where it's us versus them and I win by destroying you, because that's, we're all in this together. The Latin root comes from the word striving together. Mm-hmm. So using each other to help us strive for excellence. So as I've said before, I rarely play. What was the last, competitive shoveling the snow in the driveway type of thing. I don't engage in those kind of endeavors, but I can strive in other settings, like when I'm, writing an article for a journal. I strive to be as clear as possible, identify the concept, find the right words, the energy behind the words, and put it out so people can click to it. So it's not really athletics in the same literal sense, but to be an OmniAthlete at that level is striving for excellence that requires alignment of body, mind, and spirit. So it applies to all levels. I think the value of OmniAthlete is that so many people can identify with sports in America and are really engaged in it. That's a great vehicle. But it's also a Trojan horse in the sense that sports can embody all sorts of deep metaphysical teachings if those are uncovered and addressed properly. So it's a potent combination, and it's really exciting to see how things are unfolding here.
Rick, thank you for being on the show. Wow. Guys, if you have not seen the documentary, if you have not read Rick's book, and just if you're not familiar with the work that he has put together, dive deep into his world and into the entire world of really the origins of the SEC group. If you're an athlete or a coach who feels called to understand just what the journey has looked like and what the science is around what we all know intuitively as an athlete, this story, this documentary, it points to the experience we've all had as athletes, which is that energy is not only real, but it affects how we perform, and we are able to influence through that energetic body and system. So go dive deep into his world and the work that he's done. And until next time, thank you for watching this episode of OmniAthlete. Hey, what is up, guys? Thank you for watching another episode of OmniAthlete. Please go like and subscribe to our podcast. That is our goal right now, is just to build this community as big as we possibly can, and we need your help to do it. So like and subscribe, share our content, guys. If this content adds any value to your world, that helps you perform, connect, go deeper, go wider, whatever it is that it does for you, if it provides value, all we ask is that you share our content and help grow this community. We can't accomplish our goal of elevating global consciousness through sport without you. You are an integral part of this mission and this purpose, and we need your help. So please go like, subscribe, and share our content, and continue to help us build and grow this community that is truly motivated to not just elevate consciousness, but elevate and shift the very culture of sport so that we can truly experience the athletic experience in a brand new and energizing way for so many people, guys. So thank you, and please like and subscribe. Until next time.